I don't actually have a lot of room to spare in my vegetable garden area. And I think like a lot of people, I always assumed that I didn't have the space to grow melons because they take up so much room, they sprawl everywhere. But of course, there is a way, and it's to grow them vertically. So today in this video, I'm gonna show you how I built this climbing arch to grow melons on and make the most out of my small garden space. You know, there's a reason why it's so popular to build garden trellises out of cattle panel. For one thing, it's pretty inexpensive, it's simple to put together, it actually is very fast, which surprised me very pleasantly, and it's also just gonna last a really long time. It's very sturdy, but it can be a little bit cumbersome to work with the cattle panel. So I'm gonna share with you a couple tips I found that made the process a little bit easier. And thinking about the location of where I wanted this trellis to go in my garden, for one thing, it is more or less a permanent installation. I mean, it wouldn't be that hard to dig up these stakes and move the whole thing somewhere else in the garden, but it's definitely not something that I want to do every year. I do have another trellis that I use for peas and beans and other things that is movable. And frankly, it's handy to have both kinds. So this is the spot I chose. It's in full sun like the rest of my garden. And as the plants grow over the course of this season, not only will it shade the area underneath, but it's also going to provide some shade back here behind where I've put the trellis. And my hope is to be able to keep some of those cool season crops going a little bit longer, since it'll be a little bit shaded. As the temperatures warm up, if I can keep some lettuce, and in this case I have some bok choy going, that would be a bonus to this whole project. You don't need a lot of materials for this project, which is great. So first of all, I have these 6-foot T-posts that I've sunk pretty deeply into the ground. And then when I ordered those, they actually came with the wire clips that are meant to attach the wire fencing to these sorts of T-clips. And I'll show you how those work a little later in the video. And then finally, we have the cattle panel itself. So the whole panel is 16 feet long and about 4 feet wide. I think maybe it was 50 inches, really. I got lucky. I got mine at a local sort of hardware store chain, and they were running a deal of free local delivery if you spent a certain amount of money, which was not hard to do. So I got mine delivered for free, which was amazing, because these can be really tricky to transport if you don't have a pickup or if you don't have a trailer of some kind. But it is possible to roll them up into a bit of a bundle that you could fit into maybe a small car, but for sure an SUV. So I didn't have to do that because mine were delivered, but I thought I'd give it a go. I bought an extra one for another project. I'm going to be building another climbing trellis for some passion fruit. So I did want to see if I could roll it up fairly easily by myself, as if I was going to transport it in my car. So here's how it went. I laid out the whole cattle panel and measured to about the 12th square, and I used zip ties to fold up one end to that point and just kind of keep it in place. From there, I was able to very awkwardly roll it into somewhat of a coil, and I think the key is to use plenty of zip ties so that way it doesn't move, because this is a very strong piece of metal and it wants to uncoil. So once I got the whole thing rolled up to a reasonable diameter and zip tied, then I used some bungee cord to secure it. That worked reasonably well, and I think if I were on my own, I would be able to do this and kind of awkwardly stuff it in the back of my car. It's not elegant, but it gets the job done. Once I had all my materials in place, the next thing was to measure exactly where I wanted to put it. It's not very complicated. Just figure out, obviously, how wide the trellis is and mark where you want the stakes to be placed. The stakes should be, just like I have here, a couple inches inside the edge of the trellis so that you can clip the wire clips to them. So whatever the width of your trellis is, measure in 2 to 3 inches from each side and mark where you want to put your stakes. Once I had it all marked out and planned where everything was going to go, I started to work on pounding the stakes in. Now I've got some weed fabric underneath this mulch here, so the first thing I had to do was clear away the mulch and use a utility knife to cut through that weed fabric so that I could get the posts in the ground. I used this really long screwdriver to poke a really deep hole for a couple of reasons. One, to just be able to get the stakes started a little bit easier, kind of like pre-drilling a hole if you're going to screw something in. The other reason is because I've got this irrigation pipe here and I wanted to make sure that I wasn't pounding into the pipe, because that would have obviously caused some problems. So I did that beforehand. I was able to kind of stick the stake into the ground and then just start pounding. I just used a hammer. My soil is very sandy, so this was pretty easy. It kind of just depends on the texture of your soil, how much you're gonna have to work to get these stakes in the ground. But I was aiming for about 2 feet in the ground and about 4 feet up above the ground. I wasn't super precise about this because my ground slopes, so I didn't go really fussy with measurements. I just wanted to make sure that they all looked right around the same height. Then it was time to start maneuvering the cattle panel into place. And this was a bit awkward, and this is where I can't really imagine doing this as just one person. So you may want to grab a friend. In this case, I grabbed my husband, Greg, and we kind of awkwardly folded the cattle panel in half-ish. And then this is one of my tips for you. Have a bunch of bungee cords handy. So we used bungee cords to anchor the whole panel basically in the arch shape that it was going to end up in. And this really helped. So we used bungee cords on the bottom to connect the two ends together. And then we used a few more to just kind of help keep that tension from wanting to spring back out so that we could lift it up and scooch it into place. Because once it's in place behind the posts, it more or less wants to stay there as long as your posts are sturdy and in the ground, because the force is pushing outward on those posts. So once it's wedged inside, it's going to more or less stay put. And then it's just a matter of clipping it into place. These clips can be a little bit tricky at first to figure out exactly how to use them. So let me show you how to do it. First, you put the clip around the T-post and you hook either end over one of the horizontal wires on the fencing. And then you use a screwdriver. If you stick a screwdriver in that little gap that's created, you can kind of use that as a lever to spin it around. And this tightens the clip onto the T-post and around the fencing. And then I just used pliers to keep twisting the end so it wouldn't be sticking up. But this holds really, really well. Theoretically, you could probably use zip ties, but I think it would take a lot of them to make sure that they didn't break, because there is a lot of force, a lot of strength going on here. So I really do recommend using the wire clips. I used 2 clips for each post. I've got one here at the top of the post and then another one down at the bottom. So that was enough, just 2 per post, and it's really, really strong. You can see on this side that I've started the cattle panel above my little irrigation pipe here, rather than running it all the way to the ground, because that would have meant this whole thing would be way outside of my garden bed, and I just didn't want that. On the other side, I've got it so that the bottom of the cattle panel is pretty much on the ground. All right, so the trellis is up, it's built, and now is the fun part, planting the plants. These are lemon drop melons that I have started from seed earlier this spring. Lemon drop is a type of a watermelon, but it's bright yellow, it's really sweet and a little bit tangy, almost with a citrusy flavor, hence the name. And it's my absolute favorite melon to eat. I did try growing it last season. I was reasonably successful, but where I really failed was not providing enough climbing space for the plants, because they grew like crazy and I got a ton of fruit on it. So I'm really excited to see how these grow this year. I will have more videos on that, on how to grow these lemon drop melons as they go throughout the season, so keep your eye out for that. But let me know if you've tried growing melons on an archway like this, or maybe how you use cattle panel in your own garden. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.